So this game surprised me. Yeah, I did have the impression Ninja Blade was, okay. And while it didn't help, or maybe it did, that I finished Yaiba Ninja Gaiden right before this, so all around my standards were a bit low coming into it. But now this game actually has some stuff. And doesn't that look familiar? Huh, well, let's see what's really going on here. But first, this is Combat Overview. In this series I go over the general controls to the game's main mechanic or mechanics, who or what we use those tools on, and then seeing how it all comes together. Bit more in depth, but that's what I do. We have 3 weapons to switch between on the fly, each having their dedicated roles and uses both in and out of the fight. Because of that, I'm just give a quick rundown. So the first thing to know, X is just their standard combo, and Y isn't a heavy attack, but instead there's a unique action. Okay, so we have the well-rounded katana, has a standard combo like I mentioned, and Y is the stinger to get you in. Overall, just a good pick to deal with regular enemies and dish out solid damage. We have dual blades, the fastest weapon we have, but they don't really stagger too well. X will do quick close range attacks that surround you pretty much, and Y will extend those blades out and upwards with arcing swipes. Now these are good to clear the sky or just flying enemies in general, so those little bugs and definitely winged enemies get hard countered by dual blades. And the great sword, slow but makes an impact. Because of that, they're best to use to break enemies' armor and shields, and Y will send enemies flying for some crowd control. They also have air attacks. X will do one swipe and that's it. But again, Y will have specialized options. Katana would do flying swallow, of course. Dual blades have gear barrage, and great swords has sound splitter. Now holding either the left or right trigger both in the air and on the ground would do different options for all weapons. I'm not going to go over all of them for obvious reasons, but I'll show my favorites for each one of them. Well, I saw this one already, but yeah, the greatsword has you ride your blade like a board before Nero did it in DMC5, which is kind of wild. The dual blades has a move called Flying Bird Spin Kick. Yeah, it's basically Chun-Li's spinning bird kick. My favorite one on the katana is him putting the blade on his feet, doing some breakdancing spin moves just like Raiden. Something to know about these moves in combat in general, enemies don't really get put into long hit stun or juggle state of any kind. Combos still exist, but it's just going from your base attacks into any of those crazy unique actions. Now the good thing about those moves, they're there to give extra options to use depending on your or the enemy's positioning. So these attacks give each weapon more answers for those situational setups, so they can do their job even better, which is pretty cool. But if you notice, those attacks on the triggers can be a bit laggy. For example, holding the right trigger and X with katana would do this quick forward step, but leaves you hanging. Now if you swap to another weapon, it'll cancel that and lag, and you're off again. This bit of tech opens up the combat a bit more. So if people say it's slow and clunky, well, kind of slow, but clunky, not too much. Because once you know what moves are laggy, you can hot swap to keep the pressure going and lower any or all downtime with this. You can change whatever weapon depending on the situation, like if you want to deal more damage or stop certain enemy types, if they're in the air, grounded, stuff like that. Alright, when it comes to our defenses, holding the left trigger will block. You can't move, but it does cover you in all directions. Don't block for too long though, because your guard will be broken. And a quick tap with the right trigger will have you dash step. You're not invulnerable, so best used to just reposition. Now, cool thing about those two, they both cancel attacks on hit, whiff, whatever. Even cancels end lag too. So you can do a strong move, cancel that end lag with a block. Since you're blocking, you can go into any of those set of moves from there. Now you can see things starting to add up. Alright, so on our HUD, the green is health, this blue meter underneath is our chi, and these are our blood crystals or red orbs basically. So we use those to upgrade weapons and ninjutsu. To get them, just take out enemies. But there's a way that you can receive even more if you heavily damage enemies, which puts them into this weakened state to execute them on Y. Good to look out for these because it'll raise that percentage of crystals you earn. So upgrading weapons will raise their base damage and open up some options like I mentioned. And honestly, the upgrade menus are pretty solid for an early action game. You get to see what leveling up will get you next, and there's even full videos showing you how they're going to work. Okay, so I saved this for last since it lines up with enemies and how we interact with them. So tapping LB will go into Ninja Vision, which slows down time, letting you move and attack at full speed, but at the cost of draining chi. This lets you deal extra damage in those openings, but also lets you escape enemies' attacks with the extra time. Now while you're in Ninja Vision, it'll slowly drain chi, but it also has you go through this adjustment period when you leave it. They didn't need to do that, but I like that little detail. Plus it acts as a little balance to it, so you have that risk reward going on. If staying in there for too long will make it possibly harder to fight whoever's left, since you can't really see. Now the second use of chi is for our ninjutsu on B. We have wind that will do some crowd control. Won't do big damage though, but it sets up strong follow-ups. But it also clears fire off the ground and enemies. We have fire too, and this will toss a flame to deal damage over time, or set off explosive barrels around the arena. The last one is electricity. It'll leave this wall in front of you, and any enemy who touches it will be stunned, but also reflects projectiles. Now all these ninjutsus work against bosses as well. Some will be on fire, so to get rid of it you will need wind to wipe it off them, so you can get in and actually hit them. Or if they shoot projectiles, and if you recognize that startup, you can quickly set down electricity to reflect that. Speaking of bosses, they all have some sort of gimmick to them. Some either have some platforming bits, which you can use ninja vision, right? And of course the elemental counterplay going on. And because of that, honestly, these bosses are not too bad. And they'll even give you those ninjutsus I mentioned, so there's a little bit of Mega Man thing going on too. Now when it comes to regular enemies, there's some who shoot single projectiles at you, which you can actually reflect back by timing your attack. Now if you're surrounded, using the dual blades is the best answer instead. Those quick multi-hits around you can reflect all of them with ease. I actually like this a lot because I've only seen this done in action platformers, so seeing it here was pretty cool. Wait, actually, DMC1 had this too, right? Yeah, that's right. But yeah, the jobbers, of course, here to fight. Shield guys where a great sword opens them up. Claw enemies who will leap at you and occasionally block your attacks. Even cloaked flying enemies, you can look for their shadows to find them, but ninja vision can help too, and hitting them once will knock them out of it. And yeah, that's Ninja Blade. It's pretty good. There's this whole back and forth juggling between your entire toolset. You have chi to slow down time, to press your advantage, or you can use it to escape tight spots. Or use that meter for ninjutsu to counter certain attacks and setups from regular enemies to main bosses, and even to exploration and platforming. It's just super well thought out all around. And damn, yeah, I liked it more than I thought I would have by the end. And yeah, I knew there was an emphasis on QTEs going in, so I just ran with them, and honestly, they're fun to watch and just hype. And don't worry if you mess up, they'll rewind time letting you retry them, so it's not overly harsh if you mess up, which is good, since there's quite a few of QTEs. You know what, I'm actually going to play a few because they're that good. And while that's on, if I had to really compare Ninja Blade to something, it reminds me how I feel about DMC1 and Ninja Gaiden. They weren't high-octane combo-centric games yet as most people come to know them today, because they were pretty tame with it at the start. And that's because its focus was split between other aspects like platforming, puzzle solving, and exploration alongside the combat. To me, they're just 3D-ified action platformers, which makes sense. These were the first ones on the scene, so there wasn't a formula yet. So the only reference were action games like Ninja Gaiden, Castlevania, ActRaiser, Hagane, and so on. Even Itagaki said he knew his take on Ninja Gaiden was hardcore, and that's because he wanted to replicate that same feeling of those Ninja Gaidens on NES, where that constant non-stop forward movement with that sense of urgency was all there, requiring skill and precision from the player. So even as far back as the NES, action platformers were used as inspiration for this new template going forward. Early 3D action games even have that same setup of a primary and sub-weapons. You got your main weapon to master, like learning all the attack angles both grounded or in the air like in Castlevania 4, or how you can use Stinger if you're too far, or Helm Splitter if you need to get back to the ground. That same thought process is still there. So to me, Dante's Alistair is no different from Balmot's Whip. But on top of that, you're given sub-weapons to help with more situational stuff like specific enemy types and bosses. Like using holy water to leave a lingering hitbox which can help extend your pressure or just leave as its defensive wall to hide behind. And Dante's guns follow that same idea of sub-weapons. Ebony and Ivory are used to help extend combos or your pressure. So in all these great action games, you're using your main and sub-weapons constantly swapping back and forth to counter boss attack patterns, enemy types, and their unique setups, having you on the fly switch between your entire toolset to deal with any and all situations, which is exactly what you're doing constantly in Ninja Blade. I could go on, but it's just something I've always wanted to really delve into, but some other time maybe. But yeah, tangent aside, I say Ninja Blade follows those earlier 3D action games in design and structure. It's super fun, and it has some cool ideas. So give it one full playthrough at least. It does slow down a bit near the end, And I'm sure those QTEs will lose their luster pretty quick in repeat playthroughs, but still, just a solid game. I wish they made a follow-up to see where they could have taken this concept, but I'm glad with what we got.